But first I want to introduce you all to Brad Henderson. Brad is a colleague of mine in the university writing program who's been teaching here full-time for the last 7 years or so. He has a background in the worlds of engineering as well as technical writing. He's also a novelist and a poet with a couple books under his belt. And he teaches a lot of business and technical writing, writing in the sciences classes. I tend to teach more English for Educators classes as well as advanced writing classes that are more cross-disciplinary. So we have a lot of affinities as creative types, but we also have a number of differences because of the different classes that we teach. And so we've kind of pooled our slides. The ironic part of that is that although we have 5 dongles to connect this computer to the projector, none of them is the right one, including especially the one that the bookstore told me 35 minutes ago. This is the one for you. I said, thank you. Thank you for being so dependable and speedy. So we're going to be doing this old school. And my name is Andy Jones. We're going to be co-presenting. And in addition to the work that I do for the Teaching Resources Center, which sponsors this group, I also teach for the University Writing Program for Technocultural Studies, and then every summer for the English department. Brad and I have both used journals in the classes that we teach. But we have some different perspectives. I think that because I so enjoy my work with the Teaching Resources Center, whenever I start to think about what can I do with an assignment, I tend to automatically, like, my plane goes automatically up to 30,000 feet. And I say, well, what does this have to do with course objectives? And what is the place really of the university in the life of a creative undergraduate and so forth. So I'll spend some time up there. Luckily, we have Brad here who will touch upon those, but also offer us some practical tips for those of you who are seeking them. So we will be doing some writing today, and we welcome your viewpoints. But first, I would like to introduce Brad and ask him to give you all your first assignment for today. Brad?
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here again. I'm Brad Henderson, colleague of Andy's in the University Writing Program. It's a shame that our PowerPoint slides are not projected up on the screen, but I think what we will do is I think we will be providing them through web-based distribution after the fact, won't we?
We'll email them to you this
Okay.
afternoon.
Okay.
We have your email addresses on the sign-in sheet.
Okay. Anyway, so I've heard some interesting things when you've introduced yourselves. I too have struggled with my students using the 21st century think not at all cut and paste approach to learning and research. And I think, you know, the main value of journaling is it's an opportunity to truly internalize and synthesize information from somebody else. You know, and in order to do that, you can actually do that without journaling. However, journaling creates a loop that invites students and sometimes mandates students to internalize and synthesize rather than cut and paste. So it's an excellent tool. It's also a tool for development, discovery, meditation even. We wanted you to begin by doing a little journal entry yourselves, and then it will give us something to talk about, and we're interested in seeing if you experience any discovery on the spot in doing it. So if you would, I'll give you the prompt. Describe in 50 words or fewer, an instance where you made an exciting discovery or realization. So we're looking for a story point from your life. 50 words or fewer. That's a little tiny paragraph. And if you would, without worrying about it, without worrying about coming up with a great first sentence, just essentially core dumping onto the page, let's see what you come up with. And we're going to push you to move quickly. And Andy, by the way, is writing the prompt on the board. in case I didn't articulate it clearly enough.
Instance means my feeling or just example?
Just a moment, a story. That reminds me. I threw the package into my dog into your trash can. If you can grab that. So yeah, I know.
Is this the sign-up sheet back here?
Yes, it is. Thanks, Paul. So some of you are approaching 50 words, and if this were a writing class, we would give you more time to explore these discoveries. But in this instance, we want to see where you are and hear your reflections not only on the discoveries that you've made or written about, but also on your thoughts of writing right in the middle of what would typically be lecture time in a typical class. So, thoughts? Yes, thanks.
It was kind of a difficult prompt for me to start with right off. I think in a class, if we had been talking about something around discoveries,
Right.
It might have been a little easier for me to be in this mindset.
So, yeah, so that's a very good point. What are some ways that you could add that context and encourage that sort of thinking before you get to a prompt like this? So one, that's a question that we might think about. Two, it's a question that we could answer if we wanted to. But you mentioned, for instance, having a discussion before you get to the writing. Okay, good. Other thoughts? Who wants to say something about his or her discovery? Do you feel that this is, so what you're feeling right now, by not putting your hand up, right? You're saying, well, this is kind of personal. I don't know all these people. Or you say, oh, this discovery isn't very good. Or you might say, I only have my discovery half written. Or, these are some of the anxieties that you're feeling as like established, confident professionals. Imagine how some of your undergraduates would feel. Winder?
My anxiety lies in the fact that I'm 2 words over 50.
Yeah.
I'm 55, so
It's not a real anxiety, but
I can tell.
had an article maybe blended and so on.
Right.
But I didn't find it a difficult assignment. personally. And maybe the reason for that was a very recent discovery, which I share, but I don't know if people want to hear it.
Right. Well,
I do.
They do.
Shall I give it?
Yes, please.
My visit to the grave of a friend recently underscored the validity of Hölderlin's observation that it is difficult for one to accept the death of that which he loves. And surely no one has ever yet gone to the grave of a friend without the silent hope of actually meeting him there.
That's very nice. That's great. So good. Other thoughts, Sal?
Well, I was conscious of two things. One is that a lot of things would come in, but also I was in a group, so I thought I'd better pick something that would be of interest, not just to me, to others
Right.
also. Right? So a call came in for interpreters needed during the 2000 census, and I asked what language, and they said Hmong and Kahmobol. And these are languages from the Guatemalan highlands, but here the speakers are right in the Central Valley. So this reinforced for me the sense of the immense diversity of people from all over the world, right, who are our neighbors right now.
Yeah. That is really interesting, and that's kind of food for thought. If we look at these two examples, we could see the ways that Winder's response was insightful, but also kind of emotionally rich. And then what you're describing, you present to us facts that we might not have known, kind of followed up with an insight. Whereas what Winder writes about, it's kind of like core to our being as people in ways that we haven't changed over the last 5,000 years with regard to dealing with loss. And so this is a good transition for what I was going to jump into next, and that is the different domains of thinking that we engage in. Brad will function as my PowerPoint slide as I
the scrivener right
as
now.
I speak. Thank you for being my scribe. And that is that usually when we think about Bloom and Bloom's taxonomies, we think about what many of you are already familiar with, and that is the cognitive domain. And these are different sorts of thinking tasks that we would hope undergraduate students would work on so that they can kind of step their way up the ladder to more complex thinking tasks. And from the point of view of the Teaching Resources Center, we wonder, how is it that I can create an assignment that will challenge my student to think in ways that she might not be used to? So for instance, in high school and in elementary school, knowledge is very important, especially in the era of No Child Left Behind, right? What is it that my student, my young student, can give back to me that I've given to her in class? And then in high school, we expect some sort of comprehension as well. From our undergraduates, we also expect our students to apply the knowledge that we're giving them into new situations, to take a large concept or idea, break it up into its parts, also to bring smaller ideas together and to form something new, and then finally to evaluate. Now, there's been some thinking in recent years about whether or not synthesis should be elevated over evaluation because of the creative requirements that are necessary. We were talking about the disappointment of our students who merely take things from Wikipedia, of all places, and offer it to us as their own. And that's disappointing from the point of view of academic integrity, but also because of the opportunity cost, right? That a journal can give a student an opportunity to create something out of nothing. And furthermore, ideally, when we're thinking about evaluation, that it's like a low-risk creation opportunity. That if they create something and it's like bunk or silly or cliched, they can just create something else. One thing that the poet Elizabeth Bishop said was, sometimes one of the best ways to revise a poem is to write another poem, right? That it's all like available to us. You can just, write something else right there. And that's part of what the low stakes approach of the journal seeks to emphasize. Well, yes, please.
You know, in that categories that you're having there, it seems to me that the best time for teaching all the things will be in elementary and secondary school. It's like trying to teach soccer to a 17-year-old when you know that you can teach them and learn faster if they're 8, 6-year-old. I think probably it's too late to learn all this analysis when you just take it to the college level.
I agree with you, and this is one of the main concerns that people have about our educational system right now, where there's such a focus on to what extent can we quantify that which our students have learned, and therefore reward or punish teachers and schools, that we are losing many opportunities for practice of these higher order thinking skills. And that so that we as college instructors, we have to engage in a lot of catch-up work, right? Then we're teaching soccer to 17-year-olds. And that's a task, a challenge that brings with it all sorts of frustrations, and then some would say opportunities. But yeah, I agree with you. And we need to think about what do we expect of our younger students, and how do we encourage them to...
Could you apply this journal, even if not first grade, but people that write, just tell you, okay, write, like a little journal to students that are in elementary school.
Well, I see this in my 12-year-old daughter, that when she is encouraged to write on her own, she'll write often about like books that she's reading, and then she'll start to tell stories. But she's like practicing a number of thinking skills without anyone saying to her, especially me, well, I notice you're engaging in analysis here. I suggest, I don't give her any like direction like that, because she's making all these discoveries, and it's very exciting. But not everyone's got a dad who's a writing teacher, right? And so if students aren't getting this in their schools, we have to wonder where are they going to get it? And is this one reason why they may, students, once they come into our classrooms, they feel uncomfortable creating things, and they feel more comfortable just moving data around from a more authoritative source, such as Wikipedia, which ironically has been created by a whole bunch of people. Like, it's one of our best examples of synthesis. Winder?
The summer abroad program, which normally consists of 2 segments in any particular program. There's the course for 4 units, and then there's which is given a grade, and then there are the 4 units which are marked pass, no pass, on the 98 or 198, excuse me, level, or 190, I guess 198. And the students there are required normally to do a project which will involve journal writing. And I did this for 8 years when in Europe between 2000 and 2007. There are 2 things that I noticed about the journal writing process. Number 1, the directions must be absolutely clear from the outset. If you do not make them clear enough, and I should even add to that, regurgitate it, emphasize it again, you'll sit on a train to Paris in your free weekend looking at journals which say, I met Hans downtown in Berlin today, and when we're supposed to be giving the instructor the opportunity to see what they've thought about a particular architectural style, a particular painting, or whatever, and so on. They get into the banalities of everyday life. And the second thing, which is very difficult, of course, for anyone to mandate, is the self-discipline that's required to sit down and do this. People would ask, do I have to do that every single day? And my answer to that was, you have 7 days in a week. I want to see a minimum of 5 entries, each on a separate day. That requires a certain amount of self-discipline, so they just don't write down, today we studied the difference between Bauhaus and New Classicism or something like that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to reiterate the discipline, and part of what you're saying there too is the iterative element of journal writing is really important, that students need a lot of opportunity to practice. This Malcolm Gladwell book, The Outliers, says that in order to become an expert in anything, you have to spend 5,000 hours practicing it. one of our goals as an institution is that we're sending students out into the world and they know how to communicate their thoughts well. And so do we give them 5,000 hours practice in writing? Do we require it? And I think that we don't. Now, our writing classes are still vigorous. They have a 6,000 word writing requirement. That's 25 pages of graded prose. A lot of times there are revision opportunities or even requirements depending on the class. So students do get a lot of helpful support and practice during that 10-week session, say for an advanced writing class. But they aren't necessarily learning the discipline or the excitement necessary to become lifelong learners, lifelong writers, and to see that connection between learning and writing as a process of discovery. Now, with regard to your first point, I think you're absolutely right in terms of the class that you're describing. You do need to be very clear with your instructions. But we should also encourage our students to keep journals where they are not required to satisfy us in any way, right? But that we want them to write about what is very important to them. And that might be meeting Hans downtown. Who knows what might come of that? But yeah, to find out. And frankly, I don't want to know. But students should have an opportunity to explore that as well. And that comes up with the affective domain, which I want to touch on after I hear another question or comment.
It seems like, yeah, obviously having clear directions, repeating them is important. In my classes, the journal is not so much a reflection of their daily activities and what they saw, but more a direct response to the film they saw or the speaker. But then the challenge is, how do you grade it? Because it is a part of a component of participation or, being present in the class. But, how do you grade even with clear directions? And, people have different levels of intelligence, of ability to express themselves. Some people's thoughts, bore, or I find boring and mundane, and including sometimes my own, but how do you measure those against what standard,
Yeah, that's a really good question. Luckily, I've got a handout that responds precisely to that with this rubric, which I invite you to look over. A reflection rubric for journal assignments. And here you see that it follows pretty much the categories of thinking tasks that we were covering before: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. What you often find, you think for yourself and you can discuss with your students, what distinguishes an interesting or effective journal entry from a less effective and less interesting one. And often they are responding to prompts, questions, either yours or their own, where they are asked to engage in these higher order thinking tasks. And then, a reflection might turn into an argument or to an evaluation. And that might be an evaluation that you could agree with or challenge or complicate. And then all of a sudden there's an interesting sort of dialogue going on. And that's the sort of dialogue that will never be prompted by anyone pasting anything from Wikipedia, right? Because all you're doing there is you're just saying, here is data. Here is information about this, this fact, this phenomenon, this thing that we read about. One professor in history, the way that he puts this is, well, what question are you answering? The way that my father would put this, when a student in one of his acting classes was taking on something that seemed banal, he'd say, Ralph, you're answering a question that no one is asking. And I think that that's true of some of our journals that we get in, right? That they're answering questions that we're not asking of them. But as suggested by Winder's earlier remarks, perhaps we need to do a better job of asking them questions that will lead to thoughtful as well as reflective responses. Winder?
Well, just a very quick observation, and I just gone through this awfully quickly, so I don't know, maybe in here somewhere. But it seems that the emphasis, whether it's exceed standard, at standard, below standard, has to do with knowledge, with concepts, with being able to show that they have understood the basic material that is at hand. When you look at a journal, either an entry or the whole journal itself, do you also consider it holistically? The grammar, the style, which very often can impede, in fact, the imparting, if it's poor, the imparting of the extent to which they have mastered that knowledge. I find with regard to those journals, for example, that the effort being made to express themselves in a aesthetically appropriate way is much less, of course, than it would be in a, say, 5 or 6 or 10-page paper.
Right. I would, I'm speaking now from the point of view of a writing teacher who cares a great deal about stylistic clarity. I would give students a pass on, when I talk about hierarchy of like what goes into an essay, I say that we think first about ideas, and then organization or paragraphs, and then support, and then style, and then punctuation mechanics and so forth. In my advanced writing classes, I tell my students, you should know these top 3 issues from your introductory writing classes. We're going to elevate your thinking in this class, but you should know how to do these things. We're going to spend a lot of time making your style much more clear and let your style of writing better reflect the sophistication of your thinking as an advanced undergraduate. However, in journal assignments, I give students a total pass on that because it comes back to this idea of discovery. What are my students discovering? What thoughts are they working out? What practice at writing are they engaging in? How are they going to support their ideas? What is their relationship between the ideas they're learning in the class and data and stimuli that they're encountering, especially in a summer abroad class? These are the things that I'm interested in. I'm hugely interested in style and clarity and so forth, but I'd say that the journal wouldn't be the place to focus on that. Other questions or comments? This is one of the best things about the Faculty Mentoring Faculty Program, is that no matter like and it might make us thankful that we don't have our PowerPoint slides, that no matter what sort of like systematic plan you have with the beginning of your presentation, the input is often much more interesting than our best laid plans. And I appreciate where we're going. I want to leave time for Brad to share some ideas. But the reason that we've put the psychomotor domain and the affective domain up here is that I've been thinking a lot about teaching with journals over the last few weeks, in part because I've been invited twice to speak before first graduate students in theater and dance who were TAs in a big class that required journals, and we came up with exactly this problem: how do you evaluate them? And then to faculty in theater and dance, because there was a positive response to my first talk, and so they wanted to up the ante. And when I talked to the graduate students, they wrote things down. They said, oh, good point. This is great. How wise this is. When I went to talk to faculty, as you could expect, they said, well, hold on a minute. I'd like to complicate a little bit something that you just said. And part of it was I was focusing on the cognitive domain. How is it that we're going to clarify our students' thinking and help them clarify their own thinking? But the faculty in theater and dance said, well, actually, I'm much more interested. We weren't using these terms. These are things I've re-researched in preparation for today. But I'm much more interested in these affective domain skills, right? To what extent am I receptive to what it is that I see? How do I respond to that? To what extent can I represent that? One of the faculty said, I want students to go out and notice the rhythm of something that they see in the natural world or with the way that people interact with one another. And I want them to come back into my class and dance that. Imagine that sort of challenge, the sort of like, not only the challenge to do it physically, but to try to like imagine the bridge between these two different worlds of thinking. What do I see and then what do I do? And then this will make more sense once I send you the slides, but what is it that we learn to value? And this is important for our classes. Part of what we're doing with our classes is we're saying, look, this is important, whatever it is that we're teaching. And our students might say, prove it, convince me, enthuse me about this. And this we do by focusing on the affective domain and not the cognitive domain, right? If we say, let me prove to you that this is, important, it's logical, and I want you to engage in these tasks, that is not what makes an inspiring teacher, right? When we can have students, for instance, internalize the values that we're hoping to communicate to them about the importance of whatever our field is, then that's when students get very excited. So I was talking to my stepmother about my grand victory of this talk that I gave, and I was able to use a kind of verbal aikido with these faculty, and I would say, yes, that's true, but look what you said, how about this? And then they said, oh, that's good, I'll write that down. And I thought, oh, I'm doing fine. And I was talking to my stepmother about this great experience I had, and she is an actress and an acting teacher and a director. And she said, no, Andy, I'm totally against journals. Students need to make their discoveries when they're up on the stage. Nothing that they write is going to translate. And what she was having trouble with is seeing the bridge between the cognitive and the affective domain and the psychomotor domain. And we think about this mostly with regard to our elementary school students, right? If our students get lethargic in 3rd grade, then we say, hey, let's go run around the field for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and do these math problems. We understand this much better as elementary school teachers than we do as faculty, and that's part of what my stepmother Margaret was trying to communicate to me. So let's hear from Winder, and then we'll hear from Brad.
Very quickly, the faculty member who said that he or she wished to see a bridge created by the student between what he or she had seen outside and experienced in nature, whatever it was, and how that was translated into dance and performance. I suppose it's predicated upon it being a very, very subjective situation. Someone could go out into a storm and find it sublime,
Right.
and come back and present his or her idea, adaptation of the sublime on stage. Another one could be absolutely terrified by what has been seen, particularly if you've never experienced, let's say, the North Atlantic coming off the western Irish coast.
Yeah.
So there's no expectation that's standard in this, I take it, whatsoever. It's totally individual in each case.
I'd say that the individual interpretation is hugely important. I wouldn't say that there's no expectation that it's totally individual, right? That there are ways where you can create a common vocabulary, where you can say, well, this is how I felt and this is how I might communicate it to you. Even if experiencing the same phenomenon, you might have a very different emotional response. So I'd say that the individual response, the subjective response, is very important, but it's not unitary in its importance. And I'd say, too, that that's what you're describing is one of the reasons that journals are so difficult to evaluate, and why it's important that in a dance class, an instructor see what the strengths are of a student and what the weaknesses are, and help that student compensate. This I learned last week. Help the student compensate for those weaknesses, and that every student be evaluated on the progress that he or she makes, right? To what extent is the needle being moved, as one of our colleagues in theater and dance put it.
In art, you don't expect to have everybody doing the same thing. It's like in physics, you want the answer is this.
Right.
In art, you want really to have an artist, you have to give them the flexibility to do things different.
If all your students in an art class do exactly the same thing, then you get an F, it seems to me, right? So that's how I wanted to, bring this up in terms of journaling. Journaling can have practical applications, but it can have, when we look at the affective and the psychomotor, these are not always practical. They're not always impractical, but they're not always in this realm of the cognitive, and we need to leave room for that. This is something I've learned a lot about from Brad with his work as a writer and a poet and a musician. And he's got some additional things to share now as well.
Okay, so anyway, what I will do is try to put a bow on the discussion that we've had up to this point about, you know, what is journal writing. And then we'll conclude by talking about some more tips and tricks for bringing it into your classroom. But to me, again, the central purpose and value of journal writing is that it's an action that culls discovery. And we talked a little bit about your experience responding to a writing prompt. Some of you felt you were successful with it. Some of you felt that you could have been more successful if the prompt was maybe more specific. And probably that's true. And maybe that's something to think about when you're designing an exercise in class. I suppose that we could have presented a prompt that had a fine level of granularity, like take a look at last week. What was the chief surprise that occurred to you? Now use the journalist's 5 W's and H to describe it in detail. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I don't know, I guess that's something to think about, because a lot of times, in fact, most of the time when I teach writing, I deal with scientists and engineers who are left-brain thinkers. And typically, it's easier for a scientist or an engineer to write about details, numbers, concrete things, rather than abstractions and things that are subjective. And so a lot of times, to help them get into the writing process, I design prompts that are very specific, and I constantly remind them to use who, what, when, where, why, and how if they draw a blank and they're having trouble figuring out what to put on the page. So I guess that's something to think about. And the other thing to think about is what you expect from journal writing is situational, because pure journal writing is you writing to yourself. And that audience is distinctly different from you doing a journal entry and then submitting it for review from a professor or maybe an entire classroom of students. Now, is one better than the other? No, but you know, writing is audience focused. And so sometimes I think there is value in assigning students journal activities that are not scrutinized severely or maybe publicly, that are maybe graded based on a system of you did it or you didn't do it. And some of the work that I do in my classes is graded 0 or 1, yes or no. I found that students at UC Davis rarely will do anything for nothing. They like to receive either a grade, or in my classes, when they're doing something that simply I grade as an activity that they do or not do, that they write this amount or they don't, I give them what's called a bonus point. And I have them keep track of the bonus points, and then at the end of the quarter, if they've accumulated 20 or more, 15 or more, you know, whatever, then I tell them to write it on a little 3x5 card and bring it into me. And when I'm calculating grades, if they're on the borderline, I'll use that as an insurance policy. So that's one little trick that I use. For journaling outside of the classroom, you know, people use journaling in all sorts of places. People use it for personal development. In 12-step programs, it's used as a way to meditate and pray. It really complements classic research where you read something, internalize it, synthesize it, and then make it yours. And you make it yours by writing about it. The other thing that's kind of a dilemma about journal writing is that, you know, writing is a process. Typically, if we have something important to write, it doesn't get done in one draft. So there's value of thinking about writing as something that involves a sequence of steps, a sequence of getting prepared, thinking, pre-writing, a step that involves just lowering the bar and getting something on the page, free writing, and then from that point on maybe applying radical surgery to the writing, considering the notion of deleting sentences that don't work, even whole paragraphs, rearranging things, and so on and so forth. And then the final step would be editing or putting polish and finesse on it. So journal writing is really, in terms of equivalency, most equivalent with free writing or writing a first draft. So again, if we want students to begin the writing process, we have to make sure that if that's what we're trying to do, to not be too severe when we grade it. Let's see. Okay, so we talked about audience, and then the other thing that I would leave you as food for thought is that usually in the classroom we are ultimately trying to achieve some learning objectives from a class. We're trying to achieve some products, maybe in the form of artistic projects or papers, some outcomes. Journal writing itself really is not the product. It's a part of the process. It's a part of the way that we advance students toward the end goal. And so I think it's valuable to think about it like that. I found an example for me is right now I'm trying to get a book project done in addition to teaching full-time this year, and I'm constantly overwhelmed by it to keep it on course. And so I use journaling as a way of checking in with myself and getting that mile-high view that I need to make sure that I steer the course in the right direction. And usually just sitting down and fretting about it and thinking on it and ruminating about it doesn't provide any discovery or insights for me. The light goes on for me. I see what I'm doing wrong. I see where to go. I see what to do differently when I put it on the page in a journal entry. And you know what? Most of the time I don't share those with anybody.
But they're really important for you. They are help you understand your foundational beliefs. They help you clarify and crystallize your goals. They help you demystify the next steps towards reaching whatever your goals are.
Yeah, I found that when I teach writing, I have my students do a lot of journal writing when I teach advanced composition. By the time they get done with the end of the quarter, if they've done all of the assigned journal entries, they have a fat notebook about that thick. And I found that there's a direct correlation between success in the class at maybe an A or a B level and whether or not the students do the journaling or not. Yeah.
I think what you just said is wonderful as well for another arena, not the journal. Although I'm working now together with a graduate student on an article. He said, well, what should I do? Should I think about this business of the pillar, the magic pillar in this work? And I said, no, not just think about it. When you have any thoughts about it whatsoever, write it down. We might use nothing. We might use the paragraph. We might use 3 sentences from it, but you write it down. You will find that doing that will lead you off into some other area, somewhere else down the road as well. It could be a spin-off to something else. Don't just simply ruminate on it. Exactly what you said. And he started to do that.
Right,
and I said, after a period of time, you're going to find maybe after 3, 4, 5 weeks or so, we have 10, 11, 12 pages of thoughts and so on, out of which we may distill 4 or 5. And that's already the core of what we're trying to do. So you never end up with what you just started. It's always going to change. There's always going to be some differences here and there. But there's going to be something there that's concrete that you can work with. Very difficult to do that.
Since we're Aggies, I guess we could also think about writing as a practice in farming, where we pick the ripest fruit. So.
Yeah, that's good. And to add another element to that, when you engage in the process that Brad and Winder have been speaking of, you really focus on discovery and clarification. And if you can bring those attitudes into the classroom and communicate with enthusiasm discoveries that you continue to make as an expert in your field, that sort of enthusiasm is really infectious. So any way that journaling can set the stage for that, there'll be lots of payoffs in your teaching as well, and therefore in the learning opportunities and successes of your students. But yeah.
I think
I thought I heard you have a little slip, and instead of saying, journaling, I thought you said journeying. If you didn't, I think it's a good point to ponder because,
right.
Just as there are people who go to another country and have all the tourist guides and must see everything in the book, and I've been to Lapland where I saw, 5 people in Lapland, tourists, and 4 of them had "Let's go Europe," and it's all, all reading about how Lapland you never see another tourist.
Right.
And then there are other people who obviously, take the train and wherever they land is fine. So I think one thing I get from this presentation today, besides, my responsibility to be more specific and really not assume that, writing a journal is difficult. I've been writing one since I was 15, and
right.
It's a lot of practice, like everything. But also that maybe for me, I need to focus less on the end product of the journal and really see it just as one more step for their learning and my own, because I also read the journals, and not be so focused on, how good the journal is, how bad, how thoughtful, but see it as it is, one more step. And sometimes I forget it with grades and, copying and all that. And
Good. Yeah.
The thing is, this seems to me that this is very good for classes in which is English or literature or whatever. What about the physical science? I can see that this can be used, telling people to have a journal, but you cannot use it as a grade. You can use it as a bonus point probably, because you want them to learn how to write.
Right.
But I don't know how people use this in a physics class or material science class.
Yeah, well,
It'd be interesting to look at Einstein's journals and to see what is found there. It wouldn't only be writing. I'm sure that there would be pictures and formulae and so forth. So again, it's a representation of a thinking process rather than always only a writing process.
But I can see, I see that the good of this is that you can learn how to express yourself and how to write. And in this engineering and science, that's lacking compared to the
right. Well,
But it's it's not that much because that's what we do inside. We just put this and write this, in the sense to put it in words to see, because that will help when you have to write a paper, when you have to have a proposal. It's not just only questions. It's a lot of
Right.
yeah.
Well, part of what Brad was talking about too is with regard to the affective domain, what is it that keeps us motivated? What is it that keeps us on task? What is it that separates the greatest physicists from adequate physicists? And I think that these are the things that can be explored in a journal where we remind ourselves, what is it that I value about this? Why do I spend my time working towards my goals rather than, say, distracting myself with entertainments? And these are things that can be explored and demystified through a journal, even if none of the words that are written in the journal end up in any particular, say, published article.
Yeah. And when you're looking at a classic, a research project, it begins with a hypothesis, and then there's a lot of work that goes into it. Ultimately, you collect a final set of data, but something happens after that. You analyze the data, you look for highs and lows and trends, and then you determine what it means using language.
You're talking about grad students doing this. I'm talking about electromagnetism class, a class.
Yeah.
And you want those students that are junior, sophomore, to write. So, how do you integrate that? I can see that when you have a project to do research.
Right.
I don't know how people, if they are using it in physical science.
Well, in
As an undergraduate.
yeah, I mean, what I would do is I'd say, well, think about what are your goals for the class? What are your goals for your different assignments? What are different ways of approaching those goals? And then you might come to someone like myself at the Teaching Resources Center or one of my colleagues at the writing program and ask these very questions, like how could journaling help here? Then we could start to think, well, have you considered, this assignment, this approach? And then, think about some possibilities of applying these ideas for your students. But it's difficult to imagine wholesale, well, this is what journaling can do for this field. But when you step back and say, well, what are my goals for the class? That's where we can, I hope, really be helpful. Sal?
I just have a practical question. People have been using journals. How often do you pick them up and evaluate them? What kind of feedback do you give? And what kind of practical uses have you found for the journals for the whole class? I just want to know what people do.
That's a good question. Anyone want to comment on this before Brad and I jump in?
Yeah, I used journals extensively in my summer abroad class, and that was the first place I'd really used it extensively in a classroom setting. I had just done it here or there in independent studies or internships, so all of my 199s and 192s that I do with students, I always make them keep a journal. But I try in the kind of the ongoing classes, the internships and independent studies, I try to meet with them every other week to give them feedback on the journal so they look at it. But in the study abroad program, I looked at it twice, so during the course. And so like I said, I collected it when I knew I had some time on my own that I could read through them. I gave them some feedback on it, and then I would collect them at the end to do the final grading. And then as far as grading, the prompt that you gave out, Andy, was really helpful to me in that I've always graded them as check plus, check minus, or check. So to me, the check means you did the assignment how I asked you to do it adequately.
Right.
And that's a good grade. You got to tell David's kids that's a good grade. But the check plus were people that stood head and shoulders above an adequate job for some of the reasons we've talked about. And a check minus, well, that's obvious. You didn't do an adequate job. So that's kind of how I've used it in that.
In preparation for this talk, I was reading some more about this issue of feedback that you're raising. And I came across a study that showed two different sections of the same class, one instructor. And one instructor would make a point of including a good amount of praise with any kind of writing assignment, any kind of assignment, as well as like instruction and expressions of concern and places where the writing or whatever is being evaluated could be improved. And then for the other class, he didn't focus so much on praise. He said, all right, this is what I see, this is what you need to do. And the students who were getting praise did markedly better. And larger studies have suggested this as well. And so if we take it as a given that any effective class is going to be somewhat student-centered in that you're going to engage with the student, that it'll be activity-driven, give you an opportunity, if you're a student, to do things in the class, and it'll depend upon cycles of helpful feedback from the instructor as well as from peers, then this journaling assignment gives you an opportunity to highlight the positive, to praise that which is praiseworthy, and to give students lots of encouragement. One of the ways that you do that is you praise them for taking risks. You praise them for, in my classes, divergent thinking, creative thinking, as well as for just as Paul said, doing what I asked of them. These studies also show that if you give way too much praise, that doesn't work. If you don't give enough praise, that also doesn't work. So you kind of have to find that sweet spot. And we've kind of been learning over years or decades of teaching, just where that is. But that process of feedback is very important. Journals give you another chance to provide that feedback without being as punitive as students see some of the other assignments that they're getting back from us. Well, we've gone over time. I really appreciate all your feedback today. And again, I invite any of you to nominate yourself or colleagues to be presenters at the Faculty Mentoring Faculty Program. I'm working on the final schedule for this quarter now. We've got 1 or 2 gaps, but I'll send that out via email. And then this afternoon, we'll send out these slides. Brad, any closing remarks?
Well, since we've gone 5 minutes over, the
Yeah.
answer would be probably no. Other than thanks for coming. This was an opportunity for me to think more about journaling, and also an opportunity to hear some good insights from you. So thanks for coming.
Maybe you could write your closing remarks in your journal and then.
What is the 12-step program?
Excuse me?
What